Hello, happy Friday. My name is Rich, and I'm just going through essentially just talking about what I've been putting together today, which is pretty much me learning to use Unity to try and make a music app, which currently is called Manuscript. So I thought I'd put together this video in case anyone's interested in what kind of goes on behind the scenes for making this kind of thing. I'm not an expert, so please, if you know if you know what you're talking about, and if you watch me and go like, why are you doing that, then please give constructive criticism about something you could do rather than just that's rubbish, because that would be super useful. All right, so this is Unity. This is free and wonderful video game making software, which can do pretty much anything that you need it to, and I am currently exploring using it for making music stuff. So what we have, this is our game view, and this is the scene view. We're mainly going to be looking at the scene view, but I thought it'd be useful to see that. And in fact, that's not the most useful place to go. Oh, yeah. Because all of the action is here. Because pixels are strange, and I haven't quite got my head around canvases yet. Okay, so what we see here, in fact, I'm going to get rid of this game screen. So we have our main camera, which is looking at the scene. It's kind of like hovering above. You can kind of see it represented by this little film icon here. It is currently, so that is what we can see. And that is when we actually play the game, that's what the screen will show. We then have the player. The player is our funky fellow here, which is just a run-of-the-mill circle. One of the things that we'll find out about later on is colliders, and notice that the collider is this green box here. Yeah, so we can see that I'm turning it off and on here, and that's going to interact with some of the other objects, and notice that it's not at the exact perimeter of the circle. It's actually in a bit, and I'll talk about why in a second. We then have our staff in all of its glory, and if we go back to the player, notice that there are 5 lines, and if we click on the staff, we have about 11 or so, and that's because a bunch of them are hidden, because as we what we're trying to show in this app is how music and notes go between lines and spaces, and the best way to show that is by having this kind of thing. In fact, I'll just show you the game. If you look toward the bottom, you'll be able to see the actual gameplay. Cool. And so you can see we're kind of going up and down. I did also add these buttons, which go up and down by 1 note as well, which isn't always fun. Yeah, it's weird. I can't decide if I prefer just the sliding or if I would just rather have just pressing up. It just takes you up and down a note. These buttons just work by taking you down a set distance. There's nothing more clever than that right now. Anyway, we're going to stop that. So yeah, so we've got our staff. And so the way that this works in general is that whenever the player and this little green box here, which is, it's collider, whenever that collider meets up with one of these lines, like this space or this line or this space, whenever it meets the trigger of that particular object, then magic happens, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But that's basically what's going on, is that we've got this blob and it's going up and down, and there are a bunch of lines, and when you touch one of those lines, something happens. In this case, plays a note and shows the actual, like, the letter above. The audio manager, which is the script which is used to play all the sounds. We'll probably talk about that later on. I'll just move that to the top. Then we've got the title text and the header text. So that's just the thing that says Manuscript, and the bit which says, this is really unhelpful, sorry. For example, the title text, which will say Manuscript, and then the header text, which currently doesn't say anything at all. If it did, then it would say, ah. But what happens is that the actual script of on the lines actually populates that. We then just have the image of the treble clef found from the internet. And then the last thing we have here in our hierarchy are these buttons, which you can see in the game screen and in the actual like scene, which is where we create things. They're like, UIs are huge and massive things, and this kind of goes, and so they are here, but they just kind of are printed on the front of the camera. Just makes me think of the Buster Keaton kind of painting onto the camera, sort of like special effects whenever we think about those UIs. So let's go through some of the interesting stuff. So the audio manager, this is entirely based on the audio tutorial of a guy called Brackeys, which I've been trying to follow this one particular video, which I'll probably put a link in the description. And he just does the most wonderful explanation of how to do a kind of catch-all audio manager, which results in us being able to set a lot of different notes. I'm just trying to close all of these so you can see. So we end up with 12 different notes, and we can just change this by, you know, typing in 13, and look, we've got another note at the bottom. And then we can set each of them to have the name of it, the actual audio file, which is called a clip, the volume, the pitch, whether or not it loops, and then some other clever things. And let's just quickly take a look at this, just because it's fun to show. Yeah, so it's this kind of stuff. I mean, I'll probably do another video where I talk through it, but it's basically saying we don't need to care about this stuff so much. But when it starts, it goes through that list of sounds and makes those sounds exist. And it's sort of, yeah. This is a terrible explanation, and I'll probably do a more in-depth video. But it goes through and essentially creates those sounds for us to be able to be played. And it also allows us to play and stop things really, really easily. And something I discovered was that if you've got one-shot sounds like a ba, which is going to get triggered a whole bunch of times, it's way better to have them as play one-shot, because if you just have them playing, then the second you try and play the same note, it'll cut off the first one, and so it'll be like ba 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 ba, and the tails will get lost. But if you do one-shot, every time we start a new sound, it will still just play the whole of it, and so it won't sound quite as jarring. Like the earliest version I did just used play, and then I changed that to being play one shot. Yeah, and then what we have, so these stuffs, I'll just show you just one of them, but all of them have a script called Manuscript player. This is just a default thing, don't worry about that. Oh yeah, so basically this is saying, and this is on each of the lines or spaces, that on trigger enter is the magical thing here. So what's happening is that this script is attached to each of those lines, and when the player's like hitbox touches the hitbox, the collider of any of these lines, it triggers, it touches the trigger, and it says on trigger enter, and we can actually set that up with an event. So on trigger enter, we load up that audio manager, and it plays whatever note we want to be played, which we've actually defined over here. This is just a default, but we actually end up defining that for each of the lines and spaces separately. And then it just and then it also puts the text of whatever note it actually is up at the top of the screen, populating that header text bit. So the header text is the note to be played, and this is just a little bit that I added, which just gives us the first letter. Let me just try and show you this in a little more useful fashion. How's the best way to do this? So if we go to a line, yeah, so what ends up happening, this is, say, the top line. Sorry, the top space, my apologies. So this is actually the space above the top line, which, if we know our every good boy deserves football thing, G is going to be the space above there. So we tell it that it's going to be playing the note G4. So see, note to be played is going to be G4. And if we go back to here, it means the note to be played is now G4, not C4. And then it will play note to be played, which is the G4 sound, and that's the note that we want. And then it also have G4 show up at the very top, but it'll only take the first character, so it'll only show G. So if we play this game, and we go all the way to the top, this is see it's actually, oh, in fact, yeah, we can actually see that. It's triggering this invisible line, which is space 6. And that is playing the note G4, which, if you know, is the G not 1 octave, but 2 octaves above middle C. Yeah, and so that's essentially how this works. And then whenever we're triggering any of these events, so say, for example, this middle B, which is going to be a line 3. Sorry. So you see now that's triggering the B. Yeah, and so this has been really, really interesting to put together. And the movement, for anyone, yeah, the movement's a different thing entirely. It's really, really simple to put together when you know what you're doing, which I still don't, which I definitely do not. This is not in the right place. Player. Yeah, this is right. Yeah, because basically the way that movement works is that you have... So update is something which runs every single frame of the game. And we store our current position, and if it detects a vertical input, i.e. us pressing up or down, then it will take, like, you know, a value of 1 times our max speed, which we've set up here, and times the actual amount of time we're doing it for, and then it adds on to our current position and then sets that to be the new position. So it's kind of, that's essentially how you can go forward and backwards. I did some other stuff for... Oh yeah, of course, for blocking the movement, blocking the lower or the upper movement. So this is basically saying it's checking for your movement, and if at some point you are lower than what we've set as the boundary, which currently we've set as 0.26, like, yeah, 0.26, which is just a coordinate on the actual, like, you know, in the game. The player doesn't have to know about that stuff. It's basically just the screen height. Then it just sets the new position to be that lower boundary, so we can never go lower than the lower boundary. It always kind of resets us there, and exactly the same on the upper part. So just to tell us, it's -265. If we play the game, if we look on our player, so if we go over here, let's get rid of this stuff. You can see it says the position, which is this y -2.6, and that's what I set as being the lowest. So I can go up. Notice that the y value is changing, but I can't go any lower than 0.26 because the game goes, oh, you're trying to go beyond that. Let's just keep putting you back at -2.6, and then I put whatever the upper barrier of 2.9. And that's, you know, we can change that depending on if we have more ledger lines or whatever. But that's essentially how that works. And the buttons are just the buttons are just literally moving us up 0.5 of whatever unit we're talking about here, but 0.5 up, because each of these lines or spaces is 0.5 away from each other. And we can see that. It is again. So line space 6, the position is 0.5. Then line 5, the position is 0. Then the next space is -0.5. The next line is -1. So etc. etc. So they're going down in increments of 0.5. So all the buttons are then doing is just saying just go up and down, which does mean that we can get some amazing, essentially quarter tonal sort of things-ish, because we can do, you know. So there we go. So we're not really on either of them, but that's just me messing around, really. Obviously, it only actually sounds the notes that we've triggered. Yeah, and an awful lot of that was learnt today. So I am not by any means knowledgeable about this area, but I just thought it might be interesting for people who might be curious about putting this kind of thing together themselves. Unity is free, and I mean, there's never been a better time to learn to do cool stuff. Yeah, if you've got any questions, thoughts, or general suggestions, I'd be very grateful to hear them. If you know how to use Unity and have been screaming while I've been making this video, then please let me know what I can do to improve, because I'm always looking to get better at this kind of stuff. Anyway, so thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have the greatest of weekends. Yeah, and take care of yourselves. Okay.